Okay, up to New Hampshire. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. I may make some verbal gaffes trying to read through the official summary, but I want to try to do this quickly. So I've written it in advance, and we'll try to touch on all the points as we go through. New Hampshire, the live free or die state and home to the Bush family camp, is commonly considered a swing state in the deep blue New England, but the proof has not always been in the pudding of late. Do not sleep on New Hampshire, though, as this has the potential to put the nail in Harris's coffin by allowing Trump to go without a win across the entire blue wall. With many Boston urbanites having temporarily relocated to Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire during the pandemic, a leftward shift seems unavoidable. In 2020, Biden carried New Hampshire by 7.2 points, while in 2016, the state very nearly went to Trump, while Hillary held on to a mere 0.3%, truly just a couple thousand votes. In the 2022 midterms, New Hampshire elected Maggie Hassan in a landslide Senate victory, expected to be much closer against a Trump backed candidate as well. The narrative here was that Baldock was bucked due to his Trump ties, and a non MAGA candidate would have done much better, but there's not much evidence to suggest that. Hassan won by 9 points, while a Libertarian candidate pulled another 2 points from Baldock. So, by the numbers, she performed just the same as Biden in 2020 and consistent with that expected leftward shift. Baldock was also a particularly weak candidate who had previously lost the Senate primary in 2020 and narrowly won his primary in 2022 by 1.2% due to a massive influx of Democrat dark funding into Baldock's coffers, largely because they knew he could be more easily beat than the state Senate Senator Chuck Morse. The narrative of poor performance of MAGA candidates in 2020 appears to be, I'm sorry, 2022 appears to be less of a repudiation and more so just bad candidates like we saw in Georgia. That said, as we saw in 2016, New Hampshire has the potential to swing, and due to its small population, swing dramatically. It now appears to be that the supposed leftward shift may be swinging the other direction. While many perennial New Hampshire pollsters continue to publish large margins inconsistent with expected results, oversampling Democrat affiliates likely appears to be the issue there. UMass Lowell, for example, did not publish demographic data, but claimed it used 2020 census information to model their sample. And St. Anselm polled nearly a 2-to-1 ratio of Democrats to Republicans in spite of Republicans controlling the state in terms of registrations. They have the majority. Back in 2020, Democrats outnumbered Republicans 347,000 to 333,000, but this number contains several hundred invalid registrations, which were purged in September of 21 to a final tally of 277 to 267, a virtual tie. Since then, Democrats have actually lost 8,000 registrants, while Republicans have gained 30,000, and undeclared voters decreased by 6,000. Republicans now outnumber Democrats 308 to 269. This represents a 48,000 difference in favor of the GOP since 2020, amounting to a 5.4% increase in registered population. It's a huge advantage for Trump. And as you can see by the numbers, within the margin of error at about 2.5 points off the net zero within the margin of error weighted value. Real Clear Politics also gives us a 3.5% a simple moving average, similar to our RCP raw average, which is a little bit different than the RCP average you see on Real Clear Politics. We take a moving average based off of a number of days, as well as uniqueness, one poll per pollster. If you look at the recall rebalance as well, you can see some shift here from 3.5 down to 3.3. So there is some oversampling. And that is oversampling of Biden voters in particular. There is some accounting for oversampling of party affiliation, but that's not really a very reliable data point. So we try to avoid that as often as possible. So looking at the actual 2020 scorecard rebalance, we have a 2.55% margin on the weighted moving average. And if we go ahead and actually use the real margin, it's going to be a little bit different as well. I don't know if we have accurate data for real margin. Yeah, 2.55, it's the same. So roughly the same if we use 2.55, if we use the actual 2020 realized margin, that's right here, versus the scorecard. That's the RCP and Date Silver uh, reported scorecards for 2020. So anywhere between 2.3 and 2.5%. Let's go ahead and take a look over at the actual tab itself. Yep, this is New Hampshire 2020. Okay, so this is where you can see kind of the rebalance over here as well. We've got one rebalance shift here where St. Anselm was really under counting Republicans in the state. Republicans now hold a majority in the state. And these figures are based off of the census, or the New Hampshire government registered voters announcements. So the figures that I just read off are a little bit more recent than the ones that you see here. We try to use the official ones in here to get a little bit more accurate information on the basis of, well, it would be more accurate to have the more recent data, but it can't be relied upon as well as from an actual data analysis standpoint. So in any case, in early voting, Republicans are greatly underperforming Democrats, as you can see here. This is the actual turnout with relation to the percentage of the population. That's somewhat expected, given that Republicans are not as much an early voting demographic as Democrats. But it is a pretty significant margin here. Now, men are also underperforming women by about 1%, a little bit less than 1%, maybe 0.8%. And this is including the 65 plus male to female ratio disparity, given that the 65 plus population is turning out a much, much, much higher national average. So I'm just going to reread this official statement right here. Might repeat some of the things I just mentioned, but now you actually can see where those figures are coming from. So in early voting, Republicans are greatly underperforming Democrats against their population in the state, while men underperform the national average by about a point compared to women. We discussed this. This data does include the weighted value from the 65 plus gender disparity as mentioned, and the early vote only makes up for 9.9% of the 2024 likely voters and 26% of the 65 plus age demographic, which means the 65 plus age demographic, you're going to expect a lot less movement there and a lot more movement on the younger demographics, given the likely voter turnout is very, very low. Of note is that the polls that have Trump leading or close to leading, like the Rasmussen poll, as well as some other less reputable polls, which we do not take into account, Trump is leading the 40 to 70 demo. And in polls which have him losing or by larger margins, like St. Anselm and New Hampshire, or UNH rather, he is losing the 70 plus demo. And that's mostly females, you can see by the female to male ratio in the 65 plus demographic. This is very common among United States states because of the mortality rate, the lower life expectancy for men across the United States. So the Harris +3 turnout, which you can see in terms of disparity, or +4 turnout for Democrats to Republicans in the 65 plus category in particular, keeps Trump in line with expectations, but the low early vote turnout bodes well for Trump. The turnout in Harris's key 65 plus demo with muted party affiliation suggests there could easily be a shock turnout in the election on election day. And it is my expectation that we're in for shock in New Hampshire. Okay, so as we go through each of these, there are some important references you need to know. If you look at the spreadsheet itself and you dive down into any of the given tabs, you should see references for individual breakdowns for the actual source information for registered voters, likely voters, 65 plus demographics and ratios for populations of men to women, Republican and Democrat registrations. Not all states do party affiliation registrations. Some of them do. Most of them do. Many of them don't require it. So you do have a lot of unaffiliated as well. So that sort of muddies the water a little bit. But bottom line is you'll see the references listed there. The actual references for poll data all comes from the Real Clear polling tabulation. We don't actually use their values. We just actually use that as sort of an aggregator for polling. So if you were to look at, I don't know, let's say Arizona, we're gathering all the polls that are listed here. We're not taking the rounded figures. We're only taking them when that's the only thing that's provided. So oftentimes, actually providing the fractional differences, um, as well as sourcing the crosstab data for anomalies and uh, inaccuracies in the demographic breakdowns. Related to registered and unregistered users or voters rather. So bottom line is all the data comes from here. We actually open up each of these, or I really do, and read the source data if it's provided as often as it's provided, and then provide sort of breakdowns, as you can see, New Hampshire here, where there, are more accurate figures, where there are inaccuracies in or a disparity between the real results of 2020 and the what they call the recall vote in 2024 on 2020 results. Bottom line is they're coming from real clear polling. We don't use their average, we use our own. And then we use the early voting data as provided by NBC News, as well as any other references. So I'm not going to list those references on every single video. You've got them listed here. I'll try to list them in the actual descriptions as often as possible. If I miss any of those, you've got this information for reference, and you should have the spreadsheet as well if you want to take a look at that. Some breakdown information about how this chart works. Here you've got an average of polling information on the basis of simple moving average. So if I want 18-day moving average, or if I want a 45-day moving average, I can change it there. I can poll up until a few days ago. Let's say I want to see the data up until 7 days ago. So for 21-day moving average would be 28. If I want to use a recall rebalance, that's where I'm basically adjusting for the error in party affiliation or 2020 vote rebalance. The party affiliation rebalance is really not an accurate figure. You really want to look at the 2020 rebalance. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail on other videos. And then you're looking at the weighted moving average. This is where we actually apply the scorecard for each pollster. Pollsters generally in general elections are left leaning. We apply the sample size rebalance to both the raw average and the margin of error. And then we look at how, if the 2020 misses were reapplied here, what this would look like, because there are different pollsters in 2020 as there are in 2024. So we don't have margin of error and statistical bias for all the data for 2020 as we do for 2024. Rather for 2024 as we do for 2020. So there is some value to sort of just looking at what the average turned out to be in 2020, the average miss. So this is the basics of what you're looking at. There will be another video that kind of will go into a little bit more detail, specifically the North Carolina video. Look at that if you want some more information